Hello, this is Valerie Moore from the Frederian Gazette. Thank you for joining us this windy Wednesday evening as we reenact the controversial book, Say I Slew Them Not, written by Kingsley Montevello, edited by Alexander Phillips, and narrated by Pepper Halloway. If you've enjoyed our program so far and want to support three lesbians in a recording booth, please donate to our Ko-Fi at www.ko-fi.com/The Frederian Gazette. Content warnings for this episode include police violence and brutality, colonial violence, mass death, and trauma. This program has been sponsored by Natalie's Grocer, where you can get everything for a family meal for only $10.99. That means a turkey, potatoes, and everything you need for a salad for only $10.99. Are you a vegetarian? You can get enough vegetables, starches, and tofu to make a meal that will last for a week for only $10.99. And all our items are locally sourced. Shop at Natalie's Grocer, where we put our customers and community over our profits. We now pass the mic to Pepper Halloway, who will be reading Bearcaska police reopen investigation into officers' conduct during Siegfried's Day and determine their officers acted appropriately. September 28th, 1829. Founders Square, Bearcaska, Hiva. Not a day goes by when I don't remember Siegfried's Day. It was like walking into a dream. The crowd's angry voices echoing across the square as Hivians gathered to vote directly across from us. The crisp, bitter scent of autumn clung to me, as if trying to hold me back from the gathering of young and old Ilkhatal alike. Families and friends stood together, anxious excitement flashing across their faces as they experimented with expressing their pent-up frustration and anger. My shoes clicked across the cobblestones as I joined the gathering around the four parents of Hiva. The statues formed a diamond pattern, and the foremost statue is Alfred Dejean, a heavily bearded Hivian cast in aging bronze. Devon and Asia sent our call for protesters far and wide. We must have had hundreds with us that day, prepared to demand our right to vote with our lives. Often I am asked if I knew we were all going to die. No, of course we didn't know. We assumed the Hivians would respond violently and prepared accordingly. We purchased carriages and carts from merchants and brought them with us, placed them strategically between the statues to provide us protection when the time came. Sean wanted snipers in the neighboring houses, but they were Hivian owned. It would have been more trouble than it was worth to break in and commandeer a house. We assumed some of us would die. We always assumed some of us would die, but we never thought all of us would die. Maybe it was arrogance. We had spent the last few years evading their best and rescuing our own from their nightmarish prison cells. This time, we would have the might of the Ilkhatal district behind us. It seemed impossible to fail. We also held the mistaken belief that the Hivians wanted to hide their cruelty from their own people. That's why they banished us to our own districts. It's easier to kill us in our own streets, where a self-respecting Hivian would never go. We thought if we brought the violence to their doorstep, they would see the horrific foundations their empire rested on. We should have known they would label us as monsters and demand our complete eradication. I passed tall and proud Asia and Ernest with their sleek, silver-handed cane, a wedding present from Sandy. My eyes lingered on the pair, their hands clasped together, and a part of me knew that would be the last time I saw them whole. I spotted Gary out of the corner of my eye and thought of Pip, sent to Kilbraga on a random errand so he wouldn't participate in Siegfried's Day. Too dangerous for the child, but not the father. Siegfried found me and clasped my shoulder with a grin as the crowd shouted sporadically at the Hivians. "How beautiful," he said, closing his eyes to indulge in the moment. "Today's the day, Kingsley, the last day." He squeezed my shoulder and climbed onto Dejean's statue, pointing at the voting booth and shouting, "Look at Hivian hypocrisy! Their fake democracy!" Several Hivians waiting in line to vote glanced at us in annoyance. I shouted, "No representation, no equality. That's the Hevian way." The crowd picked this up.
No representation, no
equality.
That's the Hevian way.
And many voters stopped in their tracks to stare while others filled out their forms as fast as possible before running away. Hundreds of chanting Ilkhatal took over the square, causing the two old men manning the voting booth to sweat. The civilians in the surrounding buildings locked their doors, closed their windows, and turned their signs from open to close, as if to shut out their government's many crimes. Siegfried hopped off the statue and accosted a fleeing Hevian. "How does it feel to have a say in how your life is run?" He shook his head as Siegfried moved to the next Hevian, while our group shouted, "No representation, no equality. That's the Hevian way." "To be able to walk down the street without being murdered by the police," I shouted at a fleeing Hevian. One of the old men feebly walked toward Siegfried and begged him to go home, claiming, "We can't help you." "Can't or won't," sneered Siegfried. "You gain nothing by doing this," said the old man. "These people are exercising their rights." "Rights we don't have," said Siegfried, stepping forward. "Rights taken from us." I climbed on top of the statue of Daejeon and shouted, "Return the rights you stole!" The group caught the chant, and now the air was punctuated by both mottos.
No representation,
Return the rights, you motherfuckers!
Return the rights you stole!
The lines of Hevians thinned, but there were still a few determined to ignore us. One of the old men slipped a note to a voter and whispered something in his ear. He sprinted off. Gary shouted, "End the oppression! Free to Braga!" Siegfried picked up the chant, "No representation, no equality. That is the Hevian way." I continued to lead, "Return the rights you stole."
No representation,
End the oppression! Free to Braga! Return the rights you stole!
It resulted in a wild cacophony that scared the Hevians more than being accosted did. The old men shooed the others away and packed up their belongings. Siegfried, Sandy, and I grabbed several forms and threw them into the air. "Here, my brethren," shouted Siegfried, "take back your rights. Vote these bastards out." One of the old men grabbed Siegfried's arm. "Please, stop this." "Go home," replied my cousin, wrenching his arm from his grip. "You've done your duty. Get away while you still can." He fled as Siegfried threw more forms into the air. "Siegfried!" I shouted. Police officers rushed the area, hiding behind corners of buildings and throwing themselves behind the booth. We hurled several insults as the cops took their position, and Siegfried climbed on top of Daejeon's statue and shouted, "Go to your murderous leaders and tell them here we stand, and will continue to stand until our rights are restored." "Prepare the carts," Sean and Sandy commanded. The police shouted at us as the wooden carts and carriages creaked and cracked and crashed onto the cobblestones. "Take cover!" several Ilkhatal shouted. While we protected who we couldn't fit all 100 Ilkhatal in our makeshift barricade. Those who couldn't fit fled to the shop corners and alleys, and some broke into the closed stores. We pulled out our revolvers as Siegfried encouraged, "Stand, my brethren! Stand for all who come before us, and all who will come after!" We shooed the children and the elderly away, but many stubbornly stuck to our side, urging us that they could help reload and tend to the wounded. The officer ordered his men to load. I tightened my grip on my revolver and held my breath. I had been in plenty of gunfights at that point in my life, but it didn't matter. The eternal moment of anxiety before the first gunshot was always the same. "Ready?" The police raised their rifles. "Go to the abyss, you cowards! We know right is on our side!" shouted Siegfried. "Aim! Fire!" We hugged the carts and the base of the statues, and I flinched as bullets burrowed into splintering wood and chipped stone. The sound of gunfire was replaced by moans and cries for help. I peered over the top of the statue and saw several Ilkhatal sprawled across the cobblestone. Many regrouped, while a few of the wounded crawled to shelter, invoking another hail of lead. "Fire! Fire!" shouted Siegfried, climbing to the front of the statue and shooting at the cops. Swirling smoke stunned my nostrils as bullets clipped stone and shattered windows. Sandy swore and I turned my head. The cops hugged the buildings as they inched their way around us, trying to box us in so we'd be easier to round up. Aiming around Sandy, I fired. A splash of blood burst through grey smoke. Siegfried staggered forward, grabbing onto the statue of Dejean for dear life, and raised his revolver. His hand tumbled to his side, and he hung halfway off the statue, blood running down the front of his shirt. I pulled back and reloaded, ripping the paper and pouring the powder down the barrel. The sickening sound of metal piercing flesh. Siegfried's smoking revolver tumbled to the bloody cobblestones as bullets pinned his spasming body to the statue, his head bowed down as if in prayer. My numb fingers fumbled with my revolver, and my breath caught in my throat as I stared at Siegfried's hole-ridden, jerking body, his splattering blood like bursts of fireworks with every new bullet. We needed a leader. I was second in command, and we needed a leader. I placed my revolver on top of the statue's base, and with a boost from a swearing Sandy, I pulled myself up. Bullets bounced around with a metal clank and a sickening thud as they burrowed into Siegfried's body. A swirling mess of smoke and blood. Gary joined us, shouting, "We're being flanked!" Sean sent Asia and several other Ilkhatal forward to hold the Hevians back, Ernest providing them covering fire. My revolver clicked uselessly as I fired faster than I could reload. A child's cry for help was cut short by a bullet to the head. Several unarmed Ilkhatal fled into the sulphurous smoke. Blood splattered across stone and cobblestone. Ah! Gary screamed. Sandy grabbed fleeing Ilkhatal and shouted at them to stand! Stand, damn it, stand! Smoke flashed and bullets whizzed past our ears. Wood cracked and splintered. Asia screamed. Ernest sprinted. Help them, goddammit, help them! A pause in the hail of lead and smoke, the moans of the wounded and dying echoing in my ear as I frantically reloaded. Steady the hand. We need a leader, and a leader needed steady hands. Sandy and the others redirected the remaining Ilkhatal to vulnerable spots in our barricade. The surviving children gathered ammunition and weapons from the fallen and handed them out. An elderly Ilkhatal with fully white ears sat on the ground with his head in his hands, trembling from head to toe. Asia tugged him upwards, but he waved her away, shaking his head, no, no, no. A sharp bang, bang, bang echoed around us like metal beating against metal, catching our breath in our throats. "What the fuck is that?" Gary asked, slumped to the ground, a bloody hand pressed to his side, and he coughed up blood. I peered around the corner and my eyes widened. The smoke parted enough to reveal cops holding up metal shields and lead pipes. They slammed the pipes against the shields in a rhythmic fashion. "They're going to try and breach the defenses!" I shouted. A new wave of lead caused us to duck and flinch, and the banging stopped, replaced by screaming and the pounding of feet on cobblestone. "Fire!" I shouted. Our bullets bounced off the shields as the Hevians swarmed over our line. Cracks of bone and screams of pain as metal met flesh. I fired at the Hevians as they climbed past me. Their corpses tumbled to the ground, creating small mounds on both sides of our makeshift wall. They retreated long enough for us to reload before charging again and again and again. Blood splattered across my scales and down my shirt. Smoke clung to my nostrils, and my ears ran with gunshots and screams. Our carriages and carts torn into pieces, our supporters dead or dying. Only my friends and I remained. I looked at my exhausted friends and our crawling wounded, the slaughtered children and elderly, and I slumped against Dejean's statue. I slipped a hand into my pocket and pulled out 6 bullets. 6 bullets! That was all I had. Sandy called my name and I shouted, "Retreat! Sean, Ernest, Asia, you first! Sandy, Gary, everyone else, suppress the fire!" Another cry as the Hevians charged our position once more. I chose my targets carefully. waiting until they lowered their shields to climb, slipping and sliding in the blood of their comrades, and fired. When my ammunition failed me, I turned my revolver into a club and bashed in the top's brains. One frantic Hevian threw himself at me, and we tumbled, limb tangled with limb, to the road. I landed on him with a thud and beat him with my revolver until his face caved in on himself. Sandy shouted at his family, and I looked up as Ernest, standing unsteadily, beat a Hevian, choking Asia out with Zier's silver-handed cane. Asia rose, and Ernest adjusted Zier's cane, and they ran, hand in hand. I frantically searched my dead Hevian for a weapon. Blood sprouted from Asia's back, and she stumbled forward, nearly taking Ernest down with her. A gurgled groan as Sandy slumped against Dejeuner's statue, his revolver clicking uselessly. Asia and Ernest were halfway to us, just a few more feet. Revolver, where the fuck was their Hevian's revolver? Asia, my sister, tumbled to the ground, her blood snaking around the cobblestones. Ernest knelt beside her, resting on Zier's cane for support, firing Zier's empty revolver, unable to abandon Zier's beloved. Five bullets pierced Zier's chest, and Zier crumbled backwards, falling nets to Zier's wife. Sandy staggered towards them, his body cut to bits as bullets tore into him until he resembled a bloody sponge. He collapsed to his knees and spurted out a word before falling onto his face, his hand reaching out for Asia's, his blood mingling with hers. At that moment, my world ended. My friends gone. So many innocent Ilkhatal were slaughtered. Only I remained. A random crack of a revolver from my right, Gary defiantly firing at the crowding Hevians. No, not alone. Gary survived, and there were several other Ilkhatal still resisting. I rose to my feet and tumbled to my friend's side. He refused to move his bloody hand. "It's pointless," he coughed, blood spraying the air as he spoke. "Leave me." I shook my head and draped his arm over my neck, his blood running down my back like long fingers. We charged into the swirling smoke, ducking as bullets flew around us. Gary tumbled and nearly took me down with him. No time to check for any new wounds. I grabbed his arms and swung his body over my shoulders and continued to run through the small pockets of continued fighting. Can't stop now. Just keep running. Gary rested his snout against my neck, his breath barely brushing against my scales. Hard impact, and we were flying, falling, fighting. Soft, scaleless hands wrapped around my throat. One of my clawed fingers impaling something hard and wet, screams rolling, tumbling like two beams forcefully merged into one unforgivable beast. A flash of metal as I landed on my back. A knife. I grabbed a soft wrist with one hand and a squishy, smooth neck with the other. I squeezed, sinking my nails into his flesh as the Hevian brought the knife closer and closer to my face, his bloody and burst eye dripping onto my cheek. Excruciating pain shot up and down my entire body as the gleaming knife cut down my forehead and across my left eye. I couldn't scream or breathe. My snout dropped open in silent, all-consuming pain as my own blood dripped into my mouth. The cop slumped on top of me. I lay there, shaking, trapped in an agonizing nothingness. My name. A weight pushed off me. 3 sharp breaths, my entire body quivering, my left eye throbbing. Words from a familiar source. Sean came into view. He grabbed my arm and pulled me up. He spoke, but I stared at him in a daze as if I had stood too close to an explosive, and I stumbled backwards, looking for someone. Sean gasped as he tumbled into my arms, blood gushing out of his mouth, his eyes wide and glazed over. His blood stained my shirt as he collapsed at my feet. Grabbing his revolver, I turned left and ran, bullets flying around me, up shallow stone steps. Break the glass and jiggle the doorknob. Through the door. Screams, screams, screams. Down unexpected stairs, falling. A rough landing, but enough sense to fire at the crowding cops. My hand searched for a knob and I found it. Turning it as I rose, I fell forward into the open air, crawling, then crouching, then running through an alleyway and into the street, nearly colliding with a carriage and well-dressed Hevians and down another alley. my heart throbbing in my chest, choking me, the police's hot breath on the back of my neck, unable to escape, my body ready for the inevitable bullet in the back, a manhole. One last desperate gasp of clean air, I moved the metal cover and climbed down the slippery ladder, replacing the manhole and plunging myself into filthy and decaying darkness. I slipped to the bottom and plastered myself against the slimy damp walls, waiting with bated breath for the cops to follow. I don't know how long I waited in the dark, blood dripping down my face, my eye nothing more than an angry, throbbing emptiness, but after what seemed like days, I allowed myself to breathe. I slumped to the ground, drew my knees to my chest, and sobbed. You just heard Bearcaska police reopen investigation into officers' conduct during Siegfried's day and determine that officers acted appropriately from Say I Sue Them Not by Kingsley Montevello. Tonight's episode was read by Pepper Holloway and was sponsored by Natalie's Grocer, where everyone can eat a full meal for only $10.99 because our customers come before our profits. Be sure to follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Fredarian Gazette and go to our website, www.thefredariangazette.com, for episode extras. Join us next Wednesday at 5 p.m. for episode 18, Bombings Damage Charlie Prison and Defense's Office.